And what's the greatest feedback you've received from a client?
We can't guarantee the results, but even when we haven't prevailed, I
Mhm.
remember clients saying, I really felt represented. We know that the laws are stacked against them,
Right.
and probably 1 in 100 people will qualify or be eligible. Our success rate, I'm very proud of it. We have over a 90% success rate.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Legal Soft podcast. I'm your host, Ariana Campbell, and I am the Business Development Manager here with Legal Soft. Here joining with me today is Elsa Martinez, who's been practicing immigration law for 25 years. Today, we'll be discussing what influenced her and more about her practice.
Hi, I'm Elsa Martinez, immigration attorney in Los Angeles, California, and I'm happy to be here today.
Elsa, thank you so much for joining. I'm so curious to know more about your practice, but first, I want to ask you, what's your immigration story and how does it influence your law practice?
Yes, thank you. My immigration story is interesting. I actually was born in Cuba, and in 1980, there was a very large exodus from the island, and my family immigrated to the United States. It was my parents, my brother, and my grandmother. From that point forward, I was always very passionate about the path that people would take to be legal permanent residents and ultimately citizens in the United States. And we were
Mhm.
very fortunate to avail ourselves of the laws that existed at the time.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what was your experience like right after high school?
Right after high school, I knew that I wanted to go to law school. So
Okay.
my focus was on getting the best education possible. I actually graduated from UCLA and then applied to law school. Um, Once I was in law school, I was fortunate enough to be interviewed by the Department of Justice. So I was selected as a prosecutor in Los Angeles in 1997.
Wow.
And that gave me the opportunity to appear before all the immigration judges, but also see the level of practice that clients were experiencing from the private bar.
Wow. And from the seeing the people that influenced you, I mean, what was something that you aspired, like what inspired you from those leaders that you saw?
Well, I saw a lot of individuals actually not be properly represented. I thought that the private bar could actually do better so that people's lives wouldn't be so affected or impacted. There was a time in Los Angeles where notaries or immigration attorneys who really didn't care about the results of their clients would really meet their clients for the first time in court. And as a prosecutor, I would sit there and say, why didn't they do more?
Mhm.
So after 4 years, I actually started my own practice, and that was July of 2001.
Wow. Okay. And so, what would you say has been the biggest challenge for you since you started your practice? And how did you overcome that?
Well, initially, the first huge hurdle was 9/11. So after being in practice, in private practice, just for a few months, in September of 2001, we had the greatest attack in the on the our U.S. soil. So a lot of people were running scared. People were getting arrested. It actually evolved into the Department of Homeland Security, which we never existed before. So immigration was at the foreground, obviously, and that was challenging. My practice grew very, very quickly, and then over the next 20 years, we were actually impacted again by COVID.
Mm.
And what happened there is that everything that we had learned and the way that we practice, which is to put the client first, actually allowed us to continue to do our work during our complete shutdown.
And I know you mentioned putting the client first, which is something that was highly important to you. And to expand on that, how would you say that the immigration system is still broken today?
So it's interesting because even though I have been practicing for 25 years, there's been very little reform. So in 2001, early 2001, there were some laws that allowed people to pay a penalty and be able to immigrate in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But since 2001, and that was something that was signed by Clinton, it's a 245I law, this really has been very, very little. So we have been able to change people's lives, obtain legal permanent residence for individuals, naturalize them so they're, complete voting members of our community, despite the fact that there's really been no reform whatsoever. So what I mean with the system being broken is there's just been no updates on the law.
And what would you do to fix it?
I've actually reviewed bills that have been tossed around in Congress. Some of these bills are in a vacuum. They really don't understand what's happening in the real world. A perfect example is since COVID, it takes 3 times as long to process somebody's case as it did before. So, where there's a United States citizen husband petitioning his spouse, it used to take a year and a half. Now it will take 5 to 6 years. And it's
Wow.
very difficult for people to continue to pay their legal fees. We have just recently had an increase in filing fees from immigration, a good 10 to 20% on some of their applications. And yet they don't provide a work authorization. So what I mean by it's broken, it's there's a disconnect, right? If you're applying for a benefit that you're clearly eligible for, but the processing time is taking 5 to 6 years, why not provide a vehicle so that you can have a better personal situation like a work authorization? And that would be the first thing that I would look at is what applications are we currently filing that can provide someone else an immediate relief, an immediate benefit, like a work permit? It would make the difference of night and day.
I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of frustrated clients, and I'm sure there's been times you've, been frustrated yourself dealing with all this and seeing the inaccuracies in the system. What keeps you passionate? What keeps you going and handling what you've handled to see another day?
So specifically is the results. I'm result oriented. Sometimes it'll take 10 years for a client to prevail. And I think the trust that the clients put in our firm to just stay with us. I've had clients who've been with the firm 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And ultimately, they send us a picture with their naturalization certificate. And they
Okay.
finally did it. They finally achieved their American dream. Our slogan is Juntos encontraremos el camino, which translates to together we will find the way. And although it's a slow climb, the end is just as rewarding. And so what keeps me motivated is that we have an end result that will change not only their lives, but it's exponential. So when one person becomes a US citizen, suddenly they want their wife or their child or their parents to also do that. So,
And what's the greatest feedback you've received from a client?
we can't guarantee the results, but even when we haven't prevailed, I remember clients saying, I really felt represented. We know that the laws are stacked against them.
Right.
And probably 1 in 100 people will qualify or be eligible. Our success rate, I'm very proud of it. We have over a 90% success rate. And that's because we take on cases sometimes that nobody else will. We do take on difficult cases and it may take a long time, but our passion is there. We're result oriented is what I would say.
And let's say you take on a difficult case, but you haven't been able to prevail, like that person isn't qualified or doesn't clear. How do you internalize that? I'm sure there's a level of disappointment. And if there is, like, how do you get over that?
I'm glad, Ariana, that it doesn't happen every day, but it is. It's kind of like a doctor losing a patient on the surgical table. I'm very empathetic to the clients who don't have a successful result. Our motto really is we don't want to put you in a worse position that you were in. So imagine someone who's in the United States without any status. They could have been here 10 years, 20 years. They maybe own a home or have worked for the same company for a long time, but they have no other alternative than to risk actually starting a process that could ultimately benefit them with a permanent status. The fact that they trust us enough to do that is incredible, right? Because it's like if you don't try, you'll never know. So we do weigh the risk involved to the client and do our best to put him in the best position possible.
That's awesome. And how does your family feel about like how far you've come since your journey coming here to the US? What do they have to say to you today?
Well, my mother is my biggest fan,
Oh, that's amazing.
and she sacrificed greatly to put me through school. Both she's still a great source of moral and spiritual support for me, and she has witnessed firsthand the lives that have changed. She's helped us celebrate. There's a lot still to be done. I feel like despite having done this for 25 years, there's so much more to do. There's so much more ahead of us. We're in a very anti-immigrant climate right now, being an election year. I remember 2017 being a very important time where people were really running scared. And in January 2017, there was a lot of random arrest, a lot of just negative approach towards immigrants. And we don't know if that's ahead of us, right? So I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done. And people like myself who've actually been in the trenches
Hmm.
really need to be heard,
Yeah.
so that we can put the real everyday issues before Congress, I would think.
What advice would you give for those people to be heard, or what moves are you making in this industry for those people to be heard?
Yeah, my goals are to, for instance, I'm volunteering at citizenship drives.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
where nonprofit organizations are bringing people that can otherwise not afford an attorney get their paperwork done. So I'm
Okay.
volunteering at those. We've ran citizenship campaigns in my own firm so that we're basically handling people's cases at a very low cost so that they can have the incentive to get their applications out. We are in every which way possible, motivating the public to put their family's future and their lives in the right hands.
Hmm.
Nothing could be more damaging than trusting the wrong person with something so personal. I feel like
Right.
immigration is incredibly personal and sometimes very defining. It's different from personal injury law or workers'
Hmm.
compensation or even family law. It's very defining. Sometimes you don't get more than one chance. So it's really important that the person actually knows who they're working with and they work with someone who's knowledgeable in this field.
And someone, dealing with immigration law and dealing with, being cleared, and getting their proper paperwork, what advice would you give to someone who it's failed for them, the process? Do they keep going? Do they give up? What advice would you give that person? Even though it seems like a long-winded process and, failure can be inevitable, but what advice would you give to that person?
That's a very good question. I routinely ask people, why did you wait so long?
Hmm.
There are people who basically have had opportunities pass them by because it just, out of fear, they fail to ask. They
Wow.
fail to ask the right questions, or just consult, get a second opinion. Just
Hmm.
because one or two attorneys have said no doesn't mean that it can't be done. And one of the things that is rewarding to me is when we do prevail and people said, I can't tell you how many attorneys I consulted with and wouldn't take my case or said that there was nothing they could do.
Wow.
So for me, it's really finding the way.
And how do you find your way to balance? You see a lot going on. I know that the future, there's still, there's still brokenness within immigration law, but how do you stay balanced?
It's interesting because having been through decades of this, I've seen, Democrats, Republican, enforcement, other approaches. So I know that it's the pendulum will always be swinging one way or another. And the interesting thing about immigration is that it's never ending.
Hmm.
There's never going to be a point where people are going to say, we don't want to immigrate to the United States. So whether they're coming for because of economic hardship, or they're fleeing war, or they're
Hmm.
fleeing persecution, or they're abandoned children,
Hmm.
immigration's never ending from the beginning of our country, right, to
Right.
forever. So the focus and what I've done to find balance, to answer your question, was
Hmm.
I've become a specialist within a specialty. So I'm very passionate about immigration law when it comes
I
to
can see.
families. But when
Yes.
it comes to families, so immigration is an alphabet soup. So
Hmm.
you can be an investor, you can be a student, you can be a professional. But my specialty is really family immigration. And the
Hmm.
purpose behind that is reunification, how
Right.
to keep families together.
So I know very little about immigration law, but I have heard some horror stories of people being separated from their families for so long. Have you seen a family be reunited, and what was that experience like? Because I'm curious to know if you've ever witnessed that and
I
being
have.
at the forefront of that, like what emotion have you
I
experienced?
have one of my sweetest clients. She had been petitioned by her father, who was a resident. Her petition took over 15 years. We were able to get her status, and
Hmm.
she just last Christmas surprised her brother back home in
Wow.
Mexico. So she actually showed up during Christmas and
Mhm.
recorded knocking on the door and him
Oh my
seeing her in
gosh.
person for after at least 15 years of separation because she
Wow.
didn't have the permission to travel while her application was pending. And that's what I was referring to, giving people the ability to travel while they're here pending a process, or
Hmm.
work authorization while they're pending a process. Just those little things could make a huge difference. There's so many people who have lost their parents without the ability to go and say goodbye to them properly.
Wow.
Um, so when they finally get to go back home. It's the first thing they do, right? As soon as they get the
Yeah.
green card, that's the first thing they do. They plan their trip out. It doesn't matter. But it's being able to see their families in person is so rewarding.
And those clients who are persevering and they're able to get through that 15 years, what do you see the most in them? Is it resilience? Is it faith? Like how do they keep going? Some people would give up. Some people would be like, "Look, I'm not
Absolutely.
going to see my family, why?" Like what do you see in those people that keep pushing?
Well, I tell them, I said, time's going to pass anyway.
Yeah.
So why not file today? And
Mhm.
it may be 5 years, it may be less, right? The
Mhm.
laws can change. If I'm a big believer of the power of now, right?
Right.
So is now a good time? Absolutely. Now is always a good time. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. They may do away with certain petitions. They may, the wait list may be shortened. The quotas may be greater than they are now. The
Mhm.
immigration quotas are outdated by decades.
Wow.
So they have not kept up with the population growth, right? So now is just as good a time to start because you just never know. And there are people who didn't take advantage of certain things that they could have, that they would have benefited from now. To give you a really quick example, in April of 2001, there was a law that if
Okay.
you applied for that law,
Mhm.
you could get a green card in the United States. A lot of
Mhm.
people didn't do it. The people that did, their children are now 21 years old. I
Mhm.
am using today a law that expired in April of 2001 to get
Wow.
them a green card.
Why do you think they don't act on upon this? Is this a lack of information? I mean, or is it just a lack of motivation? Do
It's
they not
definitely,
know about these
yeah.
things?
So that's a really good question. I think that the news sometimes are very confusing. You get these sound bites of people being eligible for things, and then they
Mhm.
find out that it's not true, or it's incorrect, or it's just a news grab. So, getting the right information, nothing replaces having a consultation, a private consultation with an attorney in their
Right.
office that you can tell them what exactly your facts are. Nothing worse. I always tell them, lying to an attorney is like lying to a priest. It's not going to do you any good.
Yeah.
Come with your facts, come with the truth, and get a real answer about what your probabilities are and what you
Mhm.
should do. I think that it's not a lack of motivation. I think it's fear.
Right.
Fear of being separated. I think it's fear of being separated from your family.
And you mentioned some good points. You mentioned key points of getting a consultation, also getting a second opinion. What other resources would you add to that for someone to get more information, not just, listen or take what they hear? The consultation, a second opinion, is there anything else that you would recommend?
Absolutely. I always tell people your moral character is always going to be a factor. So,
Hmm.
regardless of whatever law has passed or will pass, your moral character, how you conduct yourself.
Hmm.
So, crimes, fraud, misrepresentation, false documents. I always tell people if you're stopped by any authorities, whether it's immigration or the police, do not lie about your name, do not lie about your immigration status. Ask to have a hearing, ask to have an attorney.
Hmm.
Regardless of your status in the United States, you have the right to have your day in court and you have the right to be represented.
Yeah.
So people forget that even though it's administrative law, you do have rights. And it's really important that people document their presence in the United States,
Hmm.
file taxes to the extent that they are required to,
Okay.
and really get involved in the community. A lot of times I feel like immigrant communities are about sort of like being in the shadows and just working and just
Hmm.
keeping their heads above water, but there's more that needs to be done, right? So get involved, become a member of a organization, do
Hmm.
volunteer work, get
Hmm.
involved in your kids' school, make sure that your kids are doing well in school because all of that is going to be looked at when you are being considered for something that's so valuable and there's a limited number.
Absolutely. And I feel like that changes people's lives too, because they're not just achieving one goal. It's like a lifestyle change almost, right? Because if they get active and they get involved, that can inspire a person too. And I'm sure you've seen that with some of your clients.
Absolutely. So it's about living your best life regardless of your
Hmm.
status here, right? Because I always tell people, I'm not going to tell you to get married, not get married, have children or not.
Right.
Live your life the best way that you could.
Hmm.
Um, Within your circumstances, right? We know that people have to sometimes work without an authorization. A lot of times they become entrepreneurs and they start their own business.
Hmm.
But if you're here in this country that we love so dearly, I believe the greatest country in the world, do your best to contribute, not just for yourself and your family, but your community at large, and it will pay off.
And you know what, Elsa? I think that's amazing advice. Like live your best life. I mean, I'm sure you've helped so many people and they find you inspirational. I found you inspirational just off what I know. So, how do you pivot from being like serious and seriously involved to living your best life? Is there anything you do for fun that you love and enjoy? Any books or anything that you're reading that gives you
Um,
fulfillment?
I love self-improvement. I actually just came off a 4-day meditation
Oh,
retreat
nice.
in Big
Okay.
Bear. That was amazing. I also practice noble silence,
Oh,
which as a
wow.
talking attorney, this is what we do for a living. It was really, really neat. So I am all about personal growth in that manner. And I love, obviously, enjoy time with my children.
Oh, that's excellent. And how many children do you
I have
have?
3 children.
Wow, that's amazing. Also, one burning question that I have is would you ever run for public office? Have you thought about that?
I have thought about judgeships,
Okay.
not public office, but my conclusion is always that I can do so much good on the
Hmm.
private side, on the private bar. Having come from government initially in my practice, I have a lot of colleagues who are now sitting judges,
Wow.
who started with me as prosecutors, and
Awesome.
I respect them greatly. And the work that they do is so important because we do need fair. Minded individuals.
Hmm.
However, I get to pick and choose my clients
Hmm.
and I get to see those results. I'll share with you my very, very first case when I went private. I was in court in Los Angeles, and on one side of the courtroom, the prosecutor sits, and then the defense attorney and their clients. And I won that first case, and
Oh, wow.
everyone in the courtroom stood up and clapped.
Oh.
When you win for the government, there's no audience, nobody claps.
Oh,
And
no.
that was so rewarding. I've never forgotten that moment.
Hmm.
And so I love that my cheering squad are families that I can help every single day.
That's awesome. Well, I am so glad that we had you here. And can you please let us know what current projects you're working on and where can we find you?
So our office is in Culver City, but
Okay.
interestingly, as you may know, I'm admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court. I can
Okay.
practice anywhere in the world.
Wow.
So whether you're in Colombia, Spain, or Florida, we
Hmm.
can represent you, and that's the
Okay.
beauty of immigration law. So we can touch individuals anywhere. So if you are someone who's looking to immigrate to the United States through a family member, we want to be your firm. And my specialty is adjustment of status.
Hmm.
If you have a child over the age of 21, please contact us. If you have a family member who's in the military, please contact us. If you've been a victim of a crime and you've helped bring those individuals to justice, you can contact us. So we have all the tools in our toolbox to help you if you qualify to become a legal permanent resident.
Hmm.
And yeah, you can find us at elsamartinezlaw.com, on this podcast, or through social media.
Thank you, Elsa, so much for joining. We loved having you today here at the Legal Soft Podcast. To all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you are well aware of the other episodes that we're coming out with. And if you have any additional questions for Elsa, please click the link below and feel free to contact her. Thank you so much.
Ariana, thank you so much for having me today. It was a pleasure to meet you and your
Thank you.
team. And I love talking about immigration law and love to come back anytime.
Thank you.